Here we go. So we're in Revelation chapter 17. Revelation chapter 17. And this chapter is particularly graphic with language. Right? If I had to title this message, it would be something similar to the title of the Great Prostitute, the Scarlet Beast, and the Conquering Lamb. And so even having a title like that with a sermon, you have graphic language within the title. And you might think that, this is rough stuff to read. Is this going to be just a great sermon? Well, here's the thing. You may not think that there's good news here, but there's absolutely good news here. This is an encouraging chapter. And it may not sound like it when I read through it, but once we go through it, hopefully you'll see it. And we are coming close. Again, I said this on the last time that I recorded it, but we're getting closer to the end of Revelation. We're really rolling through it pretty good. Probably within the next 2 months, we'll be done with it. And then we're going to move on into the wonderful book of James. I look forward to that because the study of faith and what that means for our life, the practical uses for that is just going to be amazing, I think. So hang on tight for that one. I'm ready for that one to get here. But for now, we're in Revelation chapter 17. And I'm going to read the whole chapter. We're going to look at the whole chapter today and be done. And hopefully I won't take too long after 12, but we'll see. Revelation 17. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, 'Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. The angel said to me, "The waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they are the beast. They and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make war, or they will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth." Now, we have been in Revelation for quite some time now. And over the last couple of months, I know that many of you have probably missed a sermon or two, or maybe even a bunch. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. That's okay, because today I want to try to help you all make sense of the world that we live in. Now, when I say the world that we live in, I mean as in all of the wickedness that we see every day on the news, right? Which really is just some of the plethora of ways in which this world seeks to oppress and oppose the kingdom of Jesus Christ. People all around the world, they have differing ways in which they try to account for the things that they see around them, the wickedness they see, but I want to give you an account for all of it according to the book of Revelation. Now, we have looked at and talked about the symbolic language that we find in Revelation, and how through this symbolic and language and graphic pictures that John paints for us, that he gives us these pictures through these graphic images and symbols. He does this throughout the entire book of Revelation, which with all of the forces that oppose Jesus Christ and his kingdom. And we know that behind these forces in opposition to Jesus Christ, is none other than Satan himself. And Satan, we see him also portrayed symbolically in chapter 12 as the great red dragon. But he isn't working alone. No, not at all is he alone. Rather, he is responsible for orchestrating and energizing and supporting this vast political, social, religious, immoral, idolatrous, and economic network of anti-Christian forces. In Revelation, this conspiracy of opposition to Jesus Christ is called the beast. The beast. Well, there's another term, or another name, rather, in Revelation to identify the beast, and that name is Babylon. Babylon. Now, I know that most of you know, at least, that Babylon, first and foremost, shows up as that ancient kingdom that took Israel into captivity. Babylon was guilty of wickedness and oppression and idolatry, and because of this, the name Babylon, it became associated not only with that 6th century BC kingdom, but also with any nation or any city or any ruler that stood in direct opposition to Jesus. So in Revelation, the name Babylon refers to any nation, such as North Korea or China, any social organization, such as Planned Parenthood, any political movement like that of communism under Stalin and Lenin, right? Or even the pornography industry, or false religions such as Islam, who deny that Jesus Christ is God incarnate and oppose the teaching of God's word as revealed in the Bible. You see, Babylon cannot be limited to any one individual or institution or nation or city. You know, you can't point to any location or country on a globe and say, that alone is Babylon. You can't confine Babylon within any particular geographical or territorial boundaries. Babylon is found wherever and whenever there is satanically inspired deception and idolatry. Babylon is the symbol of all worldly entrenched opposition to Jesus Christ. In ancient times, Babylon was Sodom and Gomorrah, was Egypt, Nineveh, and Rome. More recently, Babylon is Nazi Germany, China under Mao, Soviet Russia under Stalin, North Korea and Iran, and yes, even the United States, our own country, to the degree that our own country resists the kingdom of Christ. As author Alan Johnson put it, Babylon represents the total culture of the world apart from God. Now we know that the great prostitute here, or perhaps your translation says harlot or even whore. But this is a symbol for Babylon. We know that because verse 5 explicitly tells us that. Look at verse 5. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And we know that it is primarily the religious dimension, or say the religious arm of Babylon that is in view, because this prostitute here is said to commit sexual immorality and to have caused those who dwell on the earth to get drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality. And as you may recall, we talked about this in our opening study of Revelation, that in Revelation, when we see sexual immorality, that it's a metaphor, a metaphorical way of describing religious apostasy and idolatry. Now, that doesn't mean that it excludes literal physical sexual immorality. I'm sure the harlot would be perfectly fine with that. But the primary point is that to be guilty of sexual immorality means that one has abandoned the one true God and replaced him with an idol or a false god. Just as in the Old Testament, when Israel would go after other pagan gods, they were said to be committing adultery. They were fornicating, cheating on the one true God. Right? So here in the opening verses of Revelation 17, John personifies the apostate world culture as a prostitute. An image designed to emphasize the sensual and seductive appeal by which she, this prostitute, seeks to lure people away from Jesus. 4 times in this chapter she is portrayed as sitting. It's verses 1, 3, 9, and 15. All of which point to the enthronement or sovereignty and influence over the people and the beast. Right? Even in chapter 18, when we get there next week, we're going to see where she says, I sit as a queen. Now, the many waters of verse 1, on which the harlot sits, the prostitute, they're explicitly identified in verse 15 as peoples and multitudes of and nations and languages. So in other words, this is John's way of describing the global and cross-cultural influences of false religion and all forms of idolatry in which the world is engulfed. Now, one reason for the harlot's judgment is that the kings of the earth committed sexual immorality, as verse 2, with her. Or more literally, I think a better word there would be fornicated. Fornicated with her. Now, again, this is not primarily a reference to literal sexual immorality, although, again, the prostitute or the harlot would probably be perfectly fine with it and encourage it. But it's a figurative portrayal of the acceptance of the religious and idolatrous demands of the ungodly earthly order. The description of the beast here in verse 3 is almost word for word what we had in Revelation chapter 13:1. The beast's scarlet or red color links it with the dragon of 12:3, who is also red, and it may point to the bloody nature of their persecution that they used to inflict on the people of God. Now that the woman or the harlot of verse 1 rides on the beast, this would indicate some form of alliance between these two arms of evil and wickedness. You have the religious arm of the harlot and the prostitute, and you have the beast who represents the worldly systems of tyrants. Right? So you have the political, military arm of wickedness, and you have the religious arm. This is the beast and the prostitute. Right? But we see this alliance. We're gonna find shortly this alliance that the two have is broken shortly. Now, several things that we need to say about the woman or the harlot or the prostitute in verses 4 through 6 that point to her identity and nature. So this is the identity and nature of the false religions of this world. Now, 1, she is clothed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, all of which is identical to what we read of Babylon in Revelation 18:16. We'll see next week. Now, on the one hand, this points to her worldly beauty and seductive appeal. But on the other, it emphasizes the economic prosperity on the strength of which she lures unbelievers into participation into her religious fornications, these idolatrous ways. There's an obvious contrast here between the harlot and the bride of the Lamb. The latter, the bride of the Lamb, is portrayed as a city, having a city adorned with precious stones, pearls, gold, and clothed in bright, pure linen. Right? Another thing about her is in her hand she holds a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality, as in verse 4b. Now, both of which are references to various forms of idolatry in which she and her lovers are engaged. Her clothing in verse 4a and the contents of her cup in verse 4b provide an interesting contrast. You have beauty and gross wickedness. Now, a third thing would be a name is written on her forehead. The specific part of the name that is a mystery is that this harlot is the mother of all prostitutes and the mother of the abominations of the earth. That is to say, she is the fountainhead, the reservoir, the womb that in a sense gives birth to all the individual cases of historical resistance to God's will on the earth. Now, the woman is guilty of persecuting those who believe in and witness to Jesus. She is drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, there in verse 6. This is stunning and disturbing. And it overwhelms John in verse 6. Right? He confesses that he marveled greatly at the sight of this harlot. There is, I think, in his response, a mixture of fear, maybe even perplexity, and perhaps a measure of admiration for her beauty and power. John is both temporarily captivated and awestruck, but more than anything, he is fundamentally repulsed. Now, the scarlet beast of verses 7 through 8. Now, where it says of this beast that the beast as one who was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction of verse 8, I think this is clearly a satanic parody or idolatrous imitation of God, who on several occasions has been described as the one who was and who is to come. Now, first of all, that negative middle term that we have for the beast here, this is not, and then the third term, is about to rise, are probably a parody of Christ's death and resurrection. Death and resurrection. That the beast is not points to the continuing effects of his having been decisively defeated at the cross of Christ. Now, that the beast yet lives to persecute the people of God is why the earth dwellers wonder and follow after him. Also, we can look at that whereas Christ's resurrection results in his being alive forever, we saw back in Revelation chapter 1, verse 18, the beast's resurrection results in what? His destruction. Now, on the other hand, this is another way to look at it. Some believe that the reference to the beasts coming up or rising up is a parody not of the resurrection of Christ, but of his second coming. So, we noted earlier and looked at that God's coming refers to his coming at the end of the age in the person of Christ to judge the world and to consummate the kingdom. The description of the beast's coming, then, is a demonic ripoff of this final return of Christ. The beast comes up from the bottomless pit while Christ comes down from heaven. This is the way the two kind of come together in that view. I think the former, what I talked about earlier, is more the better, but that's possible as well. Now, to the harder stuff here. Verses 9 through 14, the 7 heads and the 10 horns. There are two main ways to interpret this passage. One that is historical, and then another that is symbolic. Now, within the historical view, there are a couple of different options. And the first of those would be to interpret the 7 mountains of verse 9 as the 7 hills that Rome sits on. Then those 7 mountains or hills would further be identified with 7 kings, 5 of which are in the past. They're in the past. 1 who presently rules, and at last 1 who hasn't come yet. Now, the debate within this view is which of the many Roman emperors are the 7 in view here. And I'm not going to go into this thing because it gets deep into how it goes, how that's laid out. I just wanted you to be aware that's one of the view. That there is a view that people say that the 7 mountains represents Rome, and then 7 emperors of Rome, 5 that had been in power, 1 that is, and 1 that is yet to come. Now, the second option within this historical view is to see these 7 mountains not as Rome, but representing 7 world empires that oppress the people of God. 7 in specific. Right? There would be 5 empires in John's past, namely or usually listed as Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. And then a 6th kingdom that would have been around in John's day, that would be Rome. So now we've got the 5 of the past, and we've got Rome that is the 6th. And then a 7th, which has not yet come, would be a future kingdom of the world that will come at the end of the age. Now, many futurist interpreters of the book, they take this view. This is a very popular view. They believe that the 7th empire that is to come is going to be the revival or the resurrection of the Roman Empire. They appeal to Revelation 13:13 and argue that the mortal wound, the mortal head wound there, suffered by the beast was the fall of ancient Rome. And then the miraculous recovery or this resurrection that astounds the world is the modern day revival of Rome in all of its power and glory. According to Revelation 17:11, the beast not only has 7 heads, he also somehow is himself an 8th head. The beast is an 8th empire and is somehow related to or of the 7, the first 7. That is to say that out of this revived Rome will emerge yet another pagan power related to the previous 7, right? But nevertheless distinct in its own right. This then would be the final manifestation of pagan opposition to the kingdom of God. Now, one major problem with this view is that, remember, this is all very literal stuff here. They've got these 5 world kingdoms, world empires. Then they have the 6. So there's a pattern here: 5, 1, and 1. Now, one major problem with this view is that in order to make this 5, 1, and 1 scheme of these empires work, it unjustifiably omits the devastating persecution of the people of God by the Seleucids of Syria and the evil Antiochus Epiphanes. It's just, those persecutions, I suppose, meant nothing. Also, if the 7th world empire in this list has yet to appear, it's still in the future, it hasn't come yet, then what does one do with the many major world empires that have come and gone in the past 1,600 years, especially those that sorely persecuted and oppressed the church? You see, I believe there's a better solution to understanding this, one that is more consistent with John's use of numerical symbolism. Now, on this view, this symbolic view, which is the view that I hold to, the number 7 is not numerically precise. It means that there isn't numerical value in it. As if John meant 7 specifically and not 6 or 8, right? But it rather points to the figurative idea, as he often does, or it often does in Revelation, of fullness or completeness. That's what 7 points to. So as in Revelation 12:3 and 13:1 through 2, Dr. Beale notes this. He says, fullness or totality of oppressive power is what we have in emphasis here. Therefore, rather than 7 particular kings or kingdoms of the first century or any other century, the 7 mountains and kings represent the oppressive power of the world government throughout the age, which takes to itself this divine prerogatives and persecutes God's people when they don't get in line and submit to the evil state's false claims. The 7 heads of the beast, therefore, signify the totality of blasphemy and evil. Think of it this way. It's much like our English idiom, the 7 seas. You ever heard that saying, the 7 seas? Which just means all of the seas, right? The fullness or completeness of them. So what it means, and I've said this before, is 7 doesn't point to a quantitative number, but rather to a qualitative fullness. The quality of fullness. In John's day, the particular manifestation of the beast was, of course, Rome. This may well have been what influenced him to use the figurative number 7. I don't know. There were 7 hills that Rome was built on. But although, even if that was the case, he would have told you that the beast means far, far more than Rome. Here's the simplest way, I think, to put this, to explain John's symbolic imagery. 7 is the number of totality or completeness. It's John's way of saying that the beast rules or holds sway over the entire history of fallen, rebellious humanity. But the good news for us is that the beast's tyrannical reign is coming to an end. But the beast, in the form of one of its 7 heads, is still in power. Or as John says in verse 10, it is. And yet one more expression of the beast's power, this 7th head, has not yet come, but it will. Right? However, when this final expression of the beast's tyranny over the earth has appeared, it will rule for only a little while. And just when you might think that the beast is dead and gone, it will come to life yet again, one more time, in the form of an 8th head. But soon, it will altogether go into destruction. Now, this 8th head, or manifestation of the beast's power, will lead to an unprecedented persecution of the church as Satan makes one final attempt to destroy Christ's kingdom and his church. For a brief time, John calls it 1 hour in verse 12, the 10 kings, or the totality of pagan rulers throughout the earth, will align themselves with the beast in one last-ditch effort to make war on the Lamb. That is, to destroy Jesus Christ and his people, but all to no avail. Jesus will return from heaven and conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. We see that in verse 14. So, in summary, the first 6 heads or kingdoms, they last a long time throughout the course of history, in contrast with the 7th. And they come together for earthly incarnation of evil, which will, of course, fail to last. It will remain only a short time. And likewise, this 8th head, like the other 7, it has a figurative meaning. In this 8th head, we have another parody of God, in that the beast wishes to look as though he has been resurrected as Christ was. But rather than victory as Christ had, he soon goes to destruction. Now, the 10 horns. What do we have there with the 10 horns? Those who embrace this historical view that I talked about above, they find here 10 literal rulers, or perhaps 10 literal rulers of the Roman provinces, or perhaps even 10 specific nations, and what they believe will be a revived Roman Empire. Right? And this has actually been seen out in our day back in 1981, when the 10th country joined what was then called the European Common Market, what we know today as the European Union. But the 10th country joined in 1981, and people who hold this historical view that I was talking about, they were kind of up in arms about it. This was the coming of these 10 nations. You see, because in 1950, the 6 original nations of the European Common Market were Italy, France, Belgium, Germany, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. And then on January 1st in 1973, the number of the members of the nations increased to 9 when the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Ireland joined. And people who understood this revelation in a historical sense, they were kind of on pins and needles when this 10th nation would join and when the culmination of the age was to come. So people began to sense this impending end of the age when Greece became the 10th in 1981. And this excitement, or perhaps nervousness, of course, though, was short-lived. Spain and Portugal joined in 1986, and Austria, Finland, and Sweden joined in 1995. An additional 10 countries joined in 2004: Cyprus, Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. And in 2007, Romania and Bulgaria got on board. You see, the EU had 27 member nations in 2010. So much for the idea they had in 1981. And this, I think, just goes to show you that trying to point to specifics as far as the symbolism that is found in Revelation can really just drive you mad. I mean, can you imagine what went through the heads of those who thought for sure that the end of the world was coming? It was right around the corner in 1981 because of these 10 countries, because they equated that with the 10 horns here in Revelation chapter 17, just to find out 5 years later that what they thought was just completely absurd. But as we've seen, the number 10, like the number 7, is figurative. It likely symbolizes the variety and multiplicity of the earthly nations and their rulers that join hands with the beast to enhance his power. These kings embody the fullness of Satan's attack against the Lamb in the great eschatological showdown. These 10 kings are most likely identical with the kings from the east that we saw in chapter 16. They are also identical with the kings of the earth described in Revelation 19. When we get there, we'll see who align themselves with the beast in the final battle with the Lord Jesus Christ at his return. Therefore, I'm inclined to see the 10 horns as representing any and all kings. In other words, the totality of the powers of all nations on the earth which align themselves with the beast in a final attempt to crush the church. Their unified purpose in giving their power and authority to the beast that we see in verse 13 is the result of God's providential control that we see in 17, pursuant to the fulfillment of God's eternal prophetic purpose. Verses 14 through 15 answer the question that was raised in chapter 13, verse 4, where it is said, "Who is like the beast and who can fight against it?" Well, the answer is undoubtedly that the Lamb is able to. Together with his called and chosen and faithful people, he will conquer the one who, to all outward appearances, had seemed to himself conquer. You know, the scenario portrayed out in Romans 17, 16 through 17 is stunning. Evidently, at the end of the age, the nations of the earth, these 10 horns or 10 kings, will conspire with the beast for the purpose of destroying the harlot. Now, many take this to mean that the political side of the ungodly world system will turn against the heart of the social, economic, religious side and destroy it. I agree with that. The harlot, or this the prostitute, what we would say is the apostate church, together with every false religious institution and or system, will be destroyed by a coalition of political and or military powers. Right? The Old Testament language behind the demise of the harlot comes from Ezekiel chapter 23. The 4 metaphors that are used to describe this event are that they make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. Now, the amazing thing here is that the 10 kings are inspired and energized to do this by God. That's what it says in verse 17. Right? This incredible destruction of both sides in the conflict between the religious and political spheres of the ungodly world system is so foolish, it's so short-sighted, and ultimately self-destructive that only the hand of God could account for it. Right? You have the scarlet, who represents the false religions and wickedness of the world. And then you have the beast that represents the political, tyrannical uprising and rulers of governments of this world that are wicked and oppose Christ. They come together for a while and work together, and then all of a sudden they fight each other. It's all because of God. This is a theologically fascinating assertion. Clearly, it's against God's will for anyone to assist or align with the beast. For the beast's ultimate gain is what? It's to wage war with the Lamb. Nevertheless, the angel says here, literally, God put it into their hearts, these kings, to do his will and to perform with one will with the harlot, with the beast, to destroy the harlot, and to give their kingdom to this beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. That's verse 17. Therefore, God willed, in one sense, to influence the hearts of these 10 kings so that they would do what is against God's will in another sense. Right? That's paradoxical. It seems like a contradiction. And trying to explain that will become difficult, and it would take many, many, many words. Something that you all know I'm very good at. Maybe not explaining this, but at least using many, many words. Nonetheless, I wanted you to, I want to leave it there. I'm not going to go into an explanation of that. The text says what it does, and that's what I want to preach. Perhaps at some other time in another study we can talk about how this possibly can be so. I have many ideas on that, but I'll leave those words for other times. Now, in the midst of this horrific and ugly portrayal of Satan and the beast and the great prostitute, whose aim collectively is to seduce and destroy the people of God, and thus to undermine the kingdom of our King Jesus Christ, we should be encouraged by the reminder that our Lord is the Lord of lords and that our King is the King of kings and that he will conquer, as verse 14 says, and that his purpose will be fulfilled. But more than that, we will participate with Jesus in this defeat of the beast. Look again closely at verse 14. Jesus isn't alone when he conquers. With him are his people, those whom he has called. We who are the chosen of God, we who by God's grace are faithful, are there to share in his victory. Thus, we see in the midst of all this ugliness and idolatry and immorality, the people of God stand firmly in their identity. No matter what the beast may do, he cannot reverse our calling. He cannot negate our being chosen. He cannot undermine our faithfulness in Jesus. No matter how bad conditions may get, no matter how ugly and idolatrous and immoral our society may become, never lose sight of who you are. You are called and chosen and faithful. And would you pray with me?